Check out Killteam. You spend around £50 and you have 2 teams and scenery, dice, rulebook, etc. And that's all you need. Good point. So I'm also try
I get it!
Alright, I heard you guys, and as annoyed as I am to admit that my viewers are correct about something, you were right. You happy now? Alright, sir, Warhammer 40k Killteam, what is it? How's it compared to regular 40k, and why is this video titled like it is? Find out in the next episode of Milking the YouTube Algorithm. From an outsider's perspective, Warhammer 40k Killteam can easily be brushed off as 40k but smaller, and although this is kinda sorta correct on a surface level, the intricacies and the overall benefits Killteam has to offer are something that shouldn't be ignored. Similarly to actual full-scale 40k and Killteam, the main goal of the game is to gain victory points through capturing objectives and completing your own secondary objectives. Instead of moving entire squads of characters like is often done with most units in 40k, each Killteam member is its own character, acting and moving on its own. No worrying about coherency, no worrying about detachments, just pick what you want from a singular page of information and you are good to go. Every character has their own data sheet that varies a little bit from the traditional 40k formula. Little quick rundown. M represents movement, which has these weird symbols. Don't worry about them, just look at the number inside of whatever symbol is there. APL represents the amount of actions a character can do in a turn, which includes things like capturing objectives, moving, attacking, etc. GA is for group activations, which really don't matter unless you're playing a horde army. DA is your defense, aka the amount of saving dice you roll. And SV is what you need to roll on those saves to not take those wounds. And W represents wounds. Big surprise there. Yeah, a lot of information, I know, I just want to gloss over it a bit real quick. So with these characters and their data sheets, each player takes turn using a character's APL or action points until they are depleted, and then it switches to the other player's turn. This varies a lot from 40k, in which a player moves and uses all of their units before switching to the other player's turn. In my opinion, I find this gameplay model infinitely more engaging. You know, no more waiting a whole hour for your opponent to do everything they want to do before you finally get to play the game. Instead, Killteam functions as a fast-paced game of ping pong where you and your opponent are moment by moment planning and reacting to each other's moves. And this really encapsulates Killteam as a whole. Short, engaging, and easy to understand. One of the greatest issues I have with 40k when I try to play it is there are so many things to worry about, and although Killteam still does have a pretty good amount of rules, it's a lot easier to manage in my opinion. The entirety of a team's rules really only takes up a few pages, and to the walking encyclopedia of Nurgle that frequents your local game store, this might seem like it would make things too simplistic, but it doesn't. Killteam takes advantage of the classic low skill floor, high skill ceiling model I think works great in most games. The intricacies don't come from understanding how to do the basics, but instead are grown over time by recognizing team synergies, mastering character activation order, and finding other small things to grow your skill. To a newer player, I feel this is significantly more enticing. It doesn't feel like you're climbing a mountain with an 85-degree incline, but instead, like a nice little jog through the park, where you're unknowingly being followed by a no-life player wanting to flex his ultimate skill of turning off a new player from the hobby. But thankfully, those circumstances are few and far between. But let's say, hypothetically, you get your ass kicked. Well, thankfully, in Killteam, matches tend to only last around 1 to 2 hours as compared to 40k's standard 4 to 5 hours. So instead of slowly getting dragged through shards of broken glass the entirety of your game, if you're seconding it up at Killteam, it's more of a brisk round of boxing in which you're suddenly knocked out laying on the floor with your hands full of defeated little action figures. And speaking of those action figures, let's look at them prices. Well, they still cost a pretty good chunk of money, but, you know, unlike 40k, this is your whole team, not a small little crumb in the ultimate money sink most 40k armies come to be. You buy your $60-ish team and you're good to go. Now, of course, there are terrain sets, books, accessories, and other stuff you probably should buy, but if you're on a budget, just buy that stuff online or screw it and make it yourself. Nothing says grimdark like a bunch of giant hulking demons of the Immaterium fighting the remnants of mankind over a cut and folded box of Captain Crunch. And because Killteam is cheaper, it's significantly easier and more affordable to have more than one team. Getting tired of one? Hell, just try another and see if you like them more. And you know all those factions in 40k that barely ever get any attention or have like one singular model available on Forge World that was made pre-Industrial Revolution? Well, Killteam has been Games Workshop's attempt to give these factions a little bit more love, which means you have the ability to finally play some of the factions that never really seemed possible in the regular game. And hell, I've got a pad design my videos anyway, so let's go through a quick rundown of every compendium and bespoke team in Killteam. All, of course, from an expert who's played a singular kill team and has a total of maybe 7 games under his belt. Only the best experts for the job are hired for this channel. What can I say? So without further ado, let's get into our regularly improvised programming. Alright, we're starting with the Space Marines. Who would have thunk it? The Intercession Squad. Intercession Squad is a fairly elite kill team with 6 models. Much like Space Marines in 40k, they function as a fairly balanced squad, good at combat, and flexible when speccing into specific aspects of the team. So, very flexible depending on what you want to go with. Also, really broken right now. Phobos Strike Team. Some fun, engage, conceal shenanigans, and overall just Space Marines, but a bit more sneaky. And funny enough, terrible right now. Absolutely atrocious. No one plays them, really. Space Marine Kill Team. The most creative name of the bunch is just more Space Marines, but has an even broader degree of being anything and everything your heart desires, while really only ever being played by people who just want to play Deathwatch. Or if you want a whole squad of only scouts, for whatever reason. And with the Sisters of Battle, we have the Ecclesiarchy and the Novitiates. The Ecclesiarchy, from what I've gathered, can either build a bit tankier or lean fairly heavily into their glass cannon roots. Either way, these gals are going to be leaning on some lucky rolls to deal out some fat damage or brush that shit off with a little splash of holy water. Novitiates. Novitiates rely fairly heavily on their Acts of Faith system, in which you can gain tokens by performing certain actions to spend on certain buffs for characters. Most of them are fairly defensive buffs, with a few offensives thrown in here and there, and compared to the Ecclesiarchy, they lean far more heavily into the big damage, small health. Talons of the Emperor, aka Custodes, function as Custodes. Big surprise here. Usually hyper elite, but can be run alongside the Sisters of Silence to spread the power out a bit more along units. The Custodes functions as giant meat shields that will obliterate almost anything that looks at them, and Sisters use close range aura mind games to mess with the opponent's attacks. Grey Knights, the elite version of Space Marines with a little psychic seasoning sprinkled on top. They have a few psychic buffs they can give themselves, but other than that, not a whole lot of rules for these guys, so might be good for beginners. Hunter Clade, the good old binary boys. At the start of each turning point, this kill team can pick an imperative that gives them a buff as well as a debuff. The whole gimmick here is picking the right one for certain points in the game to maximize the use of your buff and minimize how much the debuff affects you. Generally speaking, the team leans more into shooting, but does have some melee options with the Sicarians to balance out its playstyle. And with the Imperial Guard, we have 3 different kill teams. First is the Imperial Guard kill team. Very creative names, again. Fairly standard for Guard, serving as a fairly shooty team with some good opportunities for single target damage with things like Bring It Down. Fairly large amount of units, but probably not enough to be considered a horde. If you want to be a bit more elite of a kill team, you can also bring along some Tempestus Scions to beef things up a bit. Kashrkin, another gunline heavy Guard team, who would have guessed it? A lot of things to improve their shooting and overall avoid confrontation with other teams in melee. Kashrkin's gimmick is their elite point system that allow them to spend these points to up the value of some of their rolls, making this kill team arguably a little less reliant on RNG. The veteran Guardsman, everyone's favorite shovel-wielding Death Seekers. Krieg have a few cool things going on, such as access to what are essentially airstrikes, as well as Guardsman orders, which are used by their leader to yell at them to do certain things and giving them buffs. Pretty heavy gun line with a weak defense, but some fun gimmicks to help prevent damage, keep objectives, or get a bit better at shooting. Navy Breachers. These guys are a bit weird and hard for my amphibian-sized brain to understand. Their main abilities have to do with them being able to use group activation as well as armor to counter area of effect shooting damage. Most of their damage seems to be focused on close combat with the ability to focus more on melee or shooting. They also have these little robots which can be used for scouting, screening, or more primarily used by other operatives for friendly buffs or enemy debuffs. Overall seem cool, but kind of difficult to understand with their vast amount of rules, so if you're new, maybe stay away from them. But again, I don't know what I'm talking about. I heard they're really broken right now, so you know what? Don't listen to me for financial advice on what plastic action figures you should or shouldn't spend your money on. Elucidian Starstriders. Probably one of my favorite kill teams because of how unique and goofy some of them look. Not a lot of flexibility on who you can bring under rosters required to take all of them, so cuts out a bit of decision making for you. Lots of really great pre-game abilities you can choose from to help you get some good momentum to win the game with their warrants of trade. They also have a pretty great ability to do damage with things like the Privateer Sport assets, which essentially allow a few of them to pull some insanely powerful weapons out of their asses during a turn to blast their enemies with the cost of that unit's activation. Overall, a lot of great and super weird stuff at their disposal, and not gonna lie, one of the teams I plan on picking up some point in the near future. The Corsair Voidscarred. These not-so-holy Christmas elves love to move, and they love to move fast. They got some pretty solid close-range damage, and a few things that just feel pretty dirty overall. Grimy little dudes these guys are. Trying to fall back? Nah, they're just gonna stab you. Trying to move an operative around? Nah, deadly ambush. This team is essentially just giving your opponent the middle finger. Good stuff. Craft World. Compendium kill team, and it definitely shows. Kind of mobile, and not gonna lie, also kind of boring. Fairly squishy with kind of okay ranged weapons. Overall, they don't really have all that much going on. Comorites? I don't know how you pronounce it. It's essentially just Craft World with a little bit more flair, I guess. Some cool things you can do with the witches, the agile gladiators, but they're also insanely squishy with a 6-up save, but yeah, kind of okay. Void Dancer Troop. Hate to say it, but Harlequins actually have some interesting stuff going on. Their main ability revolves around doing little performances throughout the game to get buffs through active accolades. They've got some interesting ways to avoid damage, the power of the tried and true drive-by method with between colors, and they're overall fragile but slipperier than an eel covered in baby oil. I can't believe I would ever say this about Harlequins, but overall, kinda cool, and does a good job of representing their shtick. Looking over at Chaos, we have the Chaos Demons, which is a team almost entirely composed of melee outside of the horrors. Overall, nothing crazy here, unfortunately not a lot of rules since they're compendium, but really just what you would expect from demons. Gellerpox Infected. You know I said to kind of ignore GA or group activation earlier, as it's not usually a super important stat for most teams. Gellerpox is not one of those teams. Lots of models, lots of group activation, and lots of stuff to piss off your opponent. The Hulks on their team are almost unkillable, and their little weak swarms of weird shit are great at screening melee units, doing a little damage, or serving as little debuff auras with stuff like the Glitchlings. A fun time for you and a horrifying time for your opponent. Blooded, aka Traitor Guard, and my kill team. These guys are fairly squishy, usually close range army whose main draw is their blooded token system, where they can give blooded tokens to a friendly unit to make them automatically retain a hit before rolling. They've got some goofy stuff like the ability to shoot into your teammates and soak up bullets for your teammates to block them from getting hit, and other fun little tactics that display an overall disregard for personal safety. Fun stuff. Traitor Space Marines. This gang functions pretty similarly to their loyalist counterparts. Unlike their brothers devoted to the Emperor, these guys can take cultists alongside them as well. The Space Marines on this team function like Space Marines. They're tanky and they hit hard, but the cultists on this team serve as weaker but extra bodies on the board that can do some fun concealed deployment shenanigans. Nothing crazy, but for a compendium team, kind of interesting. Legionary. When building these Chaos Space Marines, you get the choice to run them under one of the 4 Chaos Gods or Undivided for specific benefits that help flesh out what specific style of play you're going for, as well as certain strategic and tactical ploys. For this reason, their playstyle tends to focus on specifically what god you pick. However, the faction is overall fairly elite. Death Guard. This kill team functions fairly similarly to other Nurgle-tainted things. Be tanky, be slow, and be especially smelly. You can choose to bring either a few Plague Marines or sub some of them out for hordes of Poxwalkers instead to serve some solid meat shields. Warp Coven. The Warp Coven is going to include a mix of Rubric Marines and Zangors with whatever percentage mix you like for a total of 11 units. This team has a few gimmicks going on, focusing mainly on special little magic spells and shit they obtain from the Shadow Wizard Money Gang.
We love casting spells.
This comes in the form of buffs from their Boons of Tzeentch, as well as psychic disciplines through their sorcerers, which serve as a mix of damaging abilities, enemy debuffs, positional stuff, and or more buffs from your team. Your sorcerers are really going to be the stars of the show, with the Marines serving as big meaty shields and the Zangors serving as glass cannons. Brood Coven. Very much a compendium team, as they overall don't have many rules. What they do have is very sneaky beaky shenanigans and a total of 10 units, all of which are fairly squishy and can either be heavily focused on range or melee depending on which unit you take. Wormblade, the other version of Genestealer cults that overall just seem better. Lots of different options on what you can take for troops, and even deadlier versions of your sneaky tactics, and overall the same mix of playstyle as the Brood Coven. About what you would expect from Genestealer cults. Hive Fleet. Much like Tyranids in 40k, these buggers are very heavily focused on melee. You can either run them in a more horde or tankier kill team, but almost any way you use them, they're going to be focused on melee. Their synapse encourages you to definitely keep them semi-close to each other, and they have a few things to help avoid shooting attacks, or move very fast to help them to excel at that whole melee thing. But it is worth noting they have some ranged options. Not much though. Cadre Mercenaries, an overall squishy team besides its giant hulking gorilla alien. Unlike what you would expect from a talent-aligned force, these guys don't really seem to excel at shooting, and although their damage between melee and range seems fairly balanced, the mobility pushed by their abilities makes me believe they're meant to be more of a melee force. But I could be wrong. Again, I don't know what I'm talking about. Farstalker Kin Band. Definitely more of a traditional feeling Kroot team in my opinion. Abilities to hide and cover, solid shooting, and pretty squishy, especially without their gorilla friend to aid them. Instead, they do have these mutts though to help perform pickup actions with their tac ops, and overall, seem like a fairly friendly bunch, besides for that whole eating corpses thing. Hunter Cadre, I don't know how to pronounce it. It's the Tau kill team if you want to pick mechs. You can bring some varied infantry, stealth suits, or swap out the infantry for some drones to do some Tau drone stuff with. Lots of shooting, lots of drone buffoonery, and lots of stealth. Sometimes kinda, yeah. Pathfinders. These guys lean much more heavily into the whole drone thing, and from what I've heard have been busted since forever. Definitely going to want to be throwing these silly little marker light tokens on your enemies with your drones to get some buffs, as well as using this Art of War thingy from this guy. I don't know how to pronounce that, I'm going to be honest. But yeah, a whole lot of stuff going on with these dudes, which also means you have to be reading a lot. Nerd. Greenskins. Take any idea of how orcs functioned regularly in 40k, and the greenskins essentially serve as direct copy and paste of those rules. Lots of abilities to retain hits or reroll dice, some terrible accuracy rolls for shooting on a majority of troops, bad saves, decent melee, and essentially an RNG toss-up that is mitigated by those abilities mentioned a second ago. Nothing crazy here, essentially what you see is what you get. Commandos. These James Bond lookalikes are a set of sneaky orcs with a lot of fun stuff to do, and of course, have their piece de resistance, the bomb squig. All units have horrible saves, but at least these boys seem to be a little better at actually hitting their targets, so overall, good at both melee and ranged stuff, while also having some interesting mobility options. Tomb World. The Compendium Necron team functions as Necrons in 40k, but on a smaller scale. You have the option to run them as more of a melee force with a lot of flayed ones, or as a ranged force with a mix of warriors, immortals, and death marks. As a standard with Necrons, they have the ability Living Metal, which allows them to heal after each turning point, as well as their reanimation protocols, which allow them to resurrect themselves at the start of each turning point. Not a lot to surprise you here, but if you like Necrons, here you go. And finally, the Hierotek Circle. Some more unique models in this Necron Sphere team, featuring some cool HQ choice and of course everyone's favorite units, the Plasmacite. Same old reanimation stuff from the previous Tomb World, but with more in the team to actually accomplish this consistently. Plasmacite's function as squishy buff/aura characters, and overall, with only 6 units besides the Plasmacites, they kind of fall into like an elite category, but it's a bit of an awkward spot for them. And that's everyone. Alright, right as I was almost done editing this video, I looked on Wikipedia just to double check some things, and 2 new rule sets came out. So, to make sure this video isn't immediately outdated, let's go over those real quick. Exaction Squad. Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, actually, no lives matter. These guys will curb stomp a fucking baby. This gang is all about sniffing out justice, spraying from their shotguns, and keeping people off their damn property. In other words, these guys are just cops in space. Great at shutting down your opponent and close combat. Hands of the Archon. This kill team takes pretty much every single Drukhari emo stereotype and cranks it up to 11. Their main gimmick here is their pain token system, in which by killing enemies they get pain tokens that give them buffs. Pretty much everything these guys have focus on tabling your opponent and making them experience 1% of the oppression and pain gamers experience on a day-to-day basis. And now that is everybody. The variety here is a nice change of pace, and every kill team tends to have their own little shtick going on. Because of this variety and cheap barrier to entry, if you have some asshole at your game shot meta chasing like a little degenerate, just blow a little $60 stack of cash to counter them, because fuck them. But since we're on the topic of shitty situations in kill team, let's talk about some of the downsides. Because as previously mentioned, boxes are relatively cheap, meta chasing could be a bit more of an issue, as there's not a huge wall of cash that needs to be climbed to chase the best of the best like in 40k. But honestly, the people who do love to meta chase probably have no issue sending themselves into debt just to try to make someone cry over a little game with action figures, so I'd say this really isn't an issue. Another big issue with Kill Team that's kind of in the same vein is that balance can be a bit all over the place. In Kill Team, there are compendium kill teams and bespoke kill teams, which are kill teams made specifically for Kill Team. General rule of thumb is that bespoke kill teams are almost always better than those that aren't, and although there are some exceptions, almost always bespoke kill teams have a lot more going on than compendium teams. It definitely kind of sucks if your favorite faction doesn't have a well-supported box, but rules change over time, so go with what you like, and they'll probably be decent at some point, or get a dedicated bespoke box eventually. That being said, although Killteam is a bit more simplistic, it still does have a decently sized set of rules that can be hard to adjust to. Yes, the bloat isn't nearly as bad as 40k, and from that same perspective, it's also easier to learn, but at the end of the day, it's still Warhammer, so it's not really ever going to be super intuitive from the get-go. Overall, I think if you're interested in 40k, but are turned off by its complexity, pricing, or time investment, Killteam is definitely worth a shot. And if you're already into 40k, getting into Killteam might be a fun way to mix things up, or to get more of your friends to the hobby. So far, I've had a great time with it, and I'm hoping you will too. Thank you all for tuning into this video. I keep hoping I'll be able to upload more than once a month, but every time I do, writer's block or my professors love to get in the way of that ever happening. Special thanks to this month's patrons, Mads, Dave the Unknown, and Yold. You guys are what's keeping me going through all of this, so thank you very much. Also in the background here is my bloodied Killteam from earlier in case any of you were curious. I haven't had time to finish painting all of them unfortunately, but I'm pretty happy with how this fat sack of lard turned out. Anyways, this video is long enough, so for now, I'll hopefully see you all soon, but until then, take care.